And okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm Paulette Dinardo. I'm the Director of Pupil Services at Hopewell Valley. But more importantly than that, I am a mother of 2 children. I have an 18-year-old daughter who's a senior and a 19-year-old son who is a freshman in college. As Carolyn shared, transformative is a really great word for this. So I had 20 years classroom teaching before I left and transitioned into administration. And I worked with some of the most challenging kids in the districts that I worked in because I love those kids. My goal is to help any child who comes through my classroom door to give them an opportunity so that they can identify their greatness. And you're going to hear me use the word greatness a lot. You're going to hear me use the word reset. And this, over the next 45 minutes to an hour, I'm just going to be introducing this philosophy, this approach. And what I'm hoping is that if you are even a little bit interested, that you'll join me. Rosetta or I will be running another parent group probably over the next few weeks. We'll do either a 3-week training or a 6-week training. We're trying to figure out how to fit it in the last few weeks of school. For me, this was transformative as well, Carolyn. I love that you use this word. Christine Abrams, how many of you know Christine? She was our supervisor of counseling. And my first week on the job here as the director, she comes running in my office with the former assistant superintendent, Chris Laquadera. Are you guys familiar with her at all? She's also the mother of 2 twin boys. They both came in and they said, you have to do this. We're doing this together. You have to join us. It's a 6-week training. And I was like, I'm not sleeping. I'm so worried about this job. And I have my kids and they're high school kids. There's no way I can do it. So for the year after that, Christine kept hounding me. And I finally did join her it was the very first parent group that she ran. It was in the mornings in the board office. So I made a conscious effort to be a part of that. And I walked down to the first day of training, and it was probably the second or the third video clip of a teenage student and his teacher talking. And the tears started, like, I cry normally. I'm just an emotional person, but the tears just started, pouring down, and I was sold after that. And then I had the privilege right before the pandemic in January of last year, Rosetta and Christine and I went on official training to become trainers. And again, it was transformative. For me, my goal was to just be able to get these techniques so I could help assist teachers deal with intense children and help parents manage their intense child. I walked into this room and there were over 300 people who were receiving this training from across the world. And they were psychologists, they were social workers, they were people from the Division of Children and Family Services in New Jersey and New Mexico. The head of the Division of Children and Family Services in Switzerland was my trainer. One of the most amazing human beings I've ever met in my life. They had us in these groups, these small groups where we had to, it was so intense, but just transformative for me. And what I learned very quickly, and I know when Rosetta is able to jump on, she'll share the same thing. Within the first hour of being in this room with these 300 individuals from all different aspects of life and supporting children, I realized this wasn't about me helping others, but this approach was helping me. And it starts with me. This whole approach really begins with you as a human being. And it has transformed my life. So I've been trained in all different types of behavioral management, behavioral approaches to supporting intense children and teenagers and young adults. And I see a lot of similarities in the training and the approaches I've used. What this does is it encapsulates and it gives you a formula. Because when you and I are in these moments, these really intense moments, like for me, I stop breathing. And because I stop breathing, I don't have brain cells in my head and I can't function. So I learned that I have to reset myself. I have to take a breath. And then because I'm able to do that with me, I can, in essence, transform the trajectory of the energy that's going on in that moment. So I'm going to share the screen, and I'm really hoping that you guys will feel comfortable enough with me to just share your thoughts. If you think something sounds crazy, talk about it. If you're and I can be full disclosure. So my kids were 16 and 17 when I started really like implementing this in my life and in my home. And they would be like, Mom, are you doing that crazy stuff again on us? Like they were old, right? So I had to, and Carolyn, I'm guessing you too, I had to really be, I had to be very careful in how I introduced it. So for those of you who have younger children, you're going to have an easier time in being able to transform. In full disclosure, it's so much easier to use this approach on students. It's much more challenging as a mom or a dad using and implementing this approach on your child, because we have these heartstrings that connect us, right, to our children. And it's really hard to kind of reset and to separate from those heartstrings. So it's definitely something that I am constantly working on as a mom. It's something I'm working on as an educator, and it's something that I'm working on consciously as a human being. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen. All right, so this is the nurtured heart approach. It was first identified and created by Howard Glasser. I'm not sure if any of you know who he is, but he is a famous child psychologist. And he also claims to have been a very intense child. And when he went through his traditional trainings of supporting children, intense children, and I'm going to define them as children with attention deficit, children with obsessive compulsive disorder, children who maybe aren't necessarily identified as hyper, but are just hyperactive, who like to poke your buttons, who like to yell a lot, who like to take little things and make them into really big mountainous moments and cause chaos in your home or in your classroom. And he learned very quickly, and he became very disheartened in the early years of his practice, realizing that a lot of these formal approaches just didn't work for some of our intense children. So he took it upon himself to do his own research, his own practice, and he worked with many families, and he has developed this based on just a combination of experiences as him as a parent, him growing up as an intense learner, and then his experiences in working with many different children across many different types of challenges and situations. So I also want to say that nurtured heart is not necessarily for the intense child. That's where it started. But nurtured heart is basically something that I believe, and I know that all the 300 people I was trained with, we believe that this is something that is for every human being. That if we did this and we really consciously lived this approach, our world would be better. And this is something that I am motivating and encouraging our teachers as I'm training them this year with Dr. Treece. We're encouraging them to use this approach throughout your day with all of your children, because everybody can flourish and benefit from it. So here's the question, and I actually want to stop sharing because I want to see your faces. Is intensity the enemy? So let's talk a little bit about that. Like when you think about maybe yourself, or you think about your children, or you think about maybe a sibling or a friend or a parent, right? Because I'm nurtured hearting my 84-year-old parents weekly now because they're in that stage, and I love them and adore them, but they need a lot of nurtured heart. So is intensity the enemy? Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Like when you think about your own personal life, I know that I have a lot of ADHD going on in me, and I did as a child, but back in the 70s, nobody really noticed or paid attention. But I was able to kind of learn as I grew older how to manage and utilize, right, that attention deficit, that hyperactivity piece that I have, to doing bigger and better things. Carolyn, were you going to share something?
Well, I just wanted to say you made a key point about parents, those of us who are in the sandwich generation. And I in my second class with Christine, I made a comment how I need to work on my parents this way too. And it's been transformative with my child, not necessarily my parents, but it does help. And I have to think about that more often. And it is more difficult, I think, as they do get older. But, my son was 12 when I tried it with him, and it really worked. So maybe I caught it at the edge. Now that he's 14, a little bit harder, but I don't know. But thank you for bringing up aging parents, because we do talk about that with challenges, single parents, and the, having to field our parents as well.
Yes.
Anybody else?
Yeah. Any other thoughts? April.
I was going to say, I don't think the intensity is the enemy, but if you could direct it, you have to direct it in
Right.
the right way.
So if we were in the room with Howard Glasser, he would be like, oh, April, I have goosebumps up and down my arms right now with that statement. You're right. It's about redirection, and it's about guiding that energy. So you as a human being, I as a human being, have the ability to take and to not feed into negative energy or into that intense negative moment. But it has to start with me. I'm the one that has to control that. It's really hard, and I do terrible. There are some days where I'm like, oh my gosh, I was the furthest thing from being nurtured heart with my daughter. And that happens because we're human beings and we're not perfect, but I'm aware of it, right? There's an awareness, there's a reflection that happens that allows me to kind of process and to learn, and then to try again a little later. All right, so I'm going to share the screen again. So I think we agree that intensity is not necessarily a bad thing. It's the way we want to direct that energy and use it. And nurtured heart, like Carolyn shared, like I shared, and like Rosetta's going to share, this has been a transformation for us. And I know for me, this happened in January prior to the shutdown. And being able to have this foundational approach to help me through that year, again, transformative, allowed me to organize and to understand who I am as a human, how I respond, what my triggers are, so that I could in turn, again, guide that energy into a more positive force. So when I think about how I was raised as a child, and again, 2 loving, beautiful parents in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Italian Americans, lots of really wonderful food, lots of love, lots of affection. When I think about though, and I think probably I would guess that many of you have had a similar upbringing, and also my teacher training was very traditional in that we were told to, we acknowledge and we give a whole lot of attention to the negative. So either a swat on the hiney or a spatula. My mom used to use the wooden spatula a lot and scream if we would do something that was a little bit not so good, not so appropriate. And that causes a lot of attention, and we do it unintentionally, right? We don't realize it because this is kind of how we were brought up throughout life. We were brought up where if we did something that was not so good, something that was not so great, the attention our parents gave us was huge, much more so than in those moments, those other 8 hours in the day when things were going really well. That I know as a mom, I miss those moments. I know I could have acknowledged those moments much more frequently. I noticed that you and your brother were sitting there sharing the crayons, and that shows me that you guys cared for each other, and I just really appreciate it. I missed a lot of those moments as a mom because I was so keened into, you know what, you tackled each other and you were trying to bite each other, and I pulled you off of each other and you're in timeout, and I was screaming and yelling and we were carrying on. And there were days when I had my kids in timeout like 150 times. And when I reflect back, I think, geez, those days probably it was pretty ineffective. So nurtured heart is really about building this inner wealth in our children, right? So we're using this approach to help them become stronger, to help them become more resilient on the inside, so that they can be resilient in those moments that are not so great in our life. So we're going to talk a little bit about these 3 stands. So when you look and you learn about Nurtured Heart, the first thing that, again, it's taken me a few months, I'd say the first couple months of my training and my reflections and meeting with other Nurtured Heart parents and professionals who've been trained, the word stand, when we take a stand. You know, what does that mean to you? I think it's and Howard made this a very purposeful word. So when you take a stand, what are you doing? Ryan?
It doesn't sound collaborative. It sounds like you're saying, I mean, I know there were a bunch of options there, but saying no or imposing
Yeah, so
on someone?
don't look at those 3. I just want to talk about the word of a stand. When I take a stand, I believe in what I'm sticking up for, right? When you take a stand on a point of view or a thought, right? Or an experience, you're taking a stand, you feel pretty strongly about it. Would you agree? Yes? You take a stand on something. So these are the 3 stands in Nurtured Heart. And Howard's intention is that, yeah, they are important. And you have to believe in these 3 stands, and you really have to follow and live these 3 stands throughout, not just those intense moments, but throughout your daily life, if that makes sense. So I'm going to go back to sharing. So these are the 3 stands in this approach. And again, when I first was introduced, even the first 6-week session that I did with Christine, I was a little confused. I'm like, well, I don't quite understand. Okay, stand number 1. Absolutely no. I refuse to energize negativity. Stand number 2, absolutely yes. I will acknowledge greatness in those molecule moments throughout the day with my children, with my spouse, with my parents, with the cashier at Pennington Market, with my hairdresser, you know, the list goes on. Stand 3, absolutely clear. I will have clear set of roles and consequences, and I'm going to follow through with those throughout my life, but especially with my children. So he goes into this big dialogue when we're in the training about Toys R Us. And I know this is kind of dating. Some of you may know Toys R Us, but when I was growing up, right, Toys R Us was a big deal. Even when my children were early years, they would go to Toys R Us for the fun, right? To be able to look at all the toys, and they would be so excited. And I would give them $5 and they would get to pick something out because they earned it, because I would have these little charts for them in the week for keeping their hands to themselves and not biting and screaming at each other and all that good stuff that we do as parents. And he talks through, and we talk about how Toys R Us, we are our child's greatest toy. And if you take a moment and you think about an intense moment that maybe recently happened with you and your child did something that was not so great, and it triggered you, our natural reaction and the pattern that we have lived through from generation to generation, for the most part. I mean, some of you may have not experienced this, but most traditional families, most traditional parenting is that when you do something wrong as a child, there's there's a lot of attention. And especially if you get mom upset or you get dad upset, you know, the face goes red, the lips get thin, they might even turn a little purple. You're yelling, you're carrying on because the kid's doing something that's not right. Now, there are moments when, again, I do this, I still do this, but there is an awareness that for our intense children, our kids that feed and want that kind of attention, because that's where they're getting most of our attention in those challenging moments. They are feeding into that stand 1. We are acknowledging them when they're not so great, and we're giving them a whole lot of feedback. And what happens is that cycle tends to continue with our intense children. So ultimately, we as a parent, we are the prize. Okay, we energize that negativity naturally. So we're energizing what the child's doing that is not so great. So the very first stand in this approach as a parent, as a human being, is absolutely no. I refuse to energize negativity. I will not reward negativity with my energy, connection, or relationship. So I'm going to stop sharing because I'm guessing you're all rolling your eyes because I did that the first time. Carolyn, I don't know if you did, but it was
Well,
challenging.
yeah, I actually, when I took the course, I thought this is sheer manipulation.
Mhm,
This reminds me of my father.
mhm.
So it took me a while, but in the meantime, I had connected because it really does work with animals too. And you were talking about giving in to negative energy. The dog just, was grabbing at my slippers. And before I lost my temper, and just with the dog, I had to pull back and think no and redirect. So yeah, there's definitely
There is, and interestingly, Carolyn, you're the second person in the last 48 hours who said that Nurtured Heart works beautifully with dogs.
and horses. Yeah, it
About
does. My trainer, I just had a dog trainer just to help me because he's a little nutty. And her approach, I stopped her and I said, this is the Nurtured Heart approach. And she said, yes, I've heard that. So it really does. It works across the board. And once you start to figure out the formula, it is magic. It's magic.
So I'm going to give you a real life example, although this is being recorded, right? So you also have to promise that you're never going to tell, if you see me in the community, because I live here, if you see me in the community, especially my son, you better never acknowledge this story. Pinky promise, right?
Yep.
So when my son, he passed his driver's test. We have a third car that we used. It was a used car that we had. We were going to allow him and eventually my daughter to drive. Again, very fortunate that I had received this training. So my husband and I said very clear rules. That's stand 3, absolutely clear. And you don't want to set these rules when you're screaming in the middle of the night because he took the car out and didn't come back when he should have, right? So very calm, he gets his driver's license, he comes home. I'm like, okay, buddy, here's the deal. Dad and I have some rules. And I told my daughter, you come join us too, because these are going to be your rules. These are our house rules, clear rules. Every 15 minutes you come in past 11 o'clock, you lose a car for a day. Okay, does everybody understand that? Tell me again what our rules are here. So they're like, oh, mom, whatever, yeah. So my son, who is a little bit intense, love him to death, he's amazing, a little bit intense, he took the car out and came in late. He came in at 11:45 within the first 2 weeks of having his driver's license. So before Nurtured Heart, I would have been screaming at him at 11:45 in the doorway, going off, carrying on, blah, 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 right? So I just said, we're waiting. I said, give me the keys, clear rules here in the house. You came in after the time, you've lost the car, and I figured it out, 4 or 5 days, you don't have a car. And I moved on. There was no screaming. There's no questioning. He didn't even try. And he does usually like to. He didn't even try to discuss it because I set very clear rules and expectations, and we followed through with the consequence. He did it one more time. And that time he lost it for 2 weeks. And it never happened again. So again, you have these clear rules, and in stand 1, absolutely no. I didn't scream or carry on. Hey, it's unfortunate you broke the rule. Here's your consequence. Tomorrow is a new day. I believe it's going to be okay. So that stand 1 is super hard. It is super hard. I am not good at it. There are moments when I'm terrible at this. But again, this is an approach that I'm constantly working at. And being able, and again, I don't know how many of you have teenagers or have mouthy kids that mouth back to you. That's one of my triggers. I hate it when they get mouthy with me. And they do, especially in those teenage years. And that can totally set me off. If they start sassing back to me, I want to sass right back to them. And what am I doing? I'm feeding that behavior. I'm energizing that. and in turn reinforcing it. So one of the big things driving into school, my daughter's teenager usually has a lot of anxiety, right? Going into school. For most teenage girls, that's normal. And I would drive her in and she would be screaming, yelling at me, just picking at me and saying mean things and just being a teenage girl. Prior to this training, I would feed into that. You know what I'm doing now? I just let her go and talk, and I don't energize it. Right? Because I know that's a trigger, and I know she's triggered. I know she's upset and probably anxious for that day, that school day. So again, this is an evolution for me. And the rides are better because of it. Are they perfect? No, they're not perfect. But this approach allows me to organize who I am, organize my reaction so that I in turn can control what goes on with them. Does that make sense? Any thoughts? All right, I'm going to go back to screen sharing.
Well, you know what, I just want to say that traveling too adds to tension in a household. And before we took off on Saturday, there was definitely a bit of tension there. And I fed into my own, I fed into it myself. So I caught myself. So we only went at it for 45 seconds to a minute. I'd like to think no more, but absolutely true. Trying to hold back, energizing the negativity. It's so tough. It's so hard.
It is so hard, and it's probably the hardest part of the three. Like as far as I'm concerned with my evolution with this, that stand one is very hard for me to do. Much easier for me to do it, when I'm in meetings or when I'm managing students, much harder to do it as a parent, I think, because of those heartstrings. So let's watch this video and we'll talk a little bit about what we see. Okay, I love the dog in that video. So what did you see? What did you see in that video? Anything pop out or stand out to you?
Oh, come on. Somebody's got to have something.
Okay.
I'll take this one.
No, that's okay. Go ahead, Kimberly.
She was ignoring the negative, or he was ignoring the negative behavior, and it goes away if you ignore it.
She was.
Wait it out long enough.
So that is very perceptive. So she was ignoring it. Did you capture, or were you able to note any moments when the child was not carrying on?
When no one was present to watch it.
But the mom was there. But right, there was that quiet, right? That quiet. Do you think it would have been appropriate for maybe mom to say something in that quiet moment? Hey, I noticed you have a really quiet voice, or I can tell your body and your voice are calm, or he's a baby, right? So, oh, good job. You're so quiet. I'm so proud of you for being quiet. Could that have maybe help the child, right? That's a little baby there.
Yeah.
Understand what the expectation is, what mom wants, right? Or dad wants. So she did a good job of not reinforce, right? She didn't scream when the child was screaming, but she also didn't acknowledge that molecule moment when there was quiet.
Yeah.
And especially for our young children, it's about that shaping that behavior, right? Okay. So ignoring, sometimes, again, this was really hard for me to kind of understand and unpack. It's something that I'm still kind of working through. Ignoring sometimes invites kids to up the ante, right? Ignoring is also a passive experience. When you're not reinforcing that negative behavior, what we as parents need to do, and this is, again, really challenging, because, again, for me, this was not part of my makeup or the way I was brought up. It's capturing those molecule moments when they are doing something that is right. We don't acknowledge enough of those. At least I know as a parent, and I know as a teacher, I had to really work on this. Acknowledging those simple moments when things are going right, when they are doing something that is good, something that is what you want to see your child doing, something that is part of their character, their makeup, and their heart, is us acknowledging that in a very simple and a very authentic way. So I love this, and I want to talk through this with you. It's the video game theory. Now, do any of you play video games? I don't. Anybody here play? No. How many of you have children that play video games? All right. I am not a fan of video games, and I'm not promoting video games in any way, shape, or form. But I found this fascinating when Howard kind of talked us through this, because it makes sense. When you watch a child who plays a video game, some of our most intense learners, they love video games. Not only do they love video games, they play them nonstop. They can stay on a video game for a very long period of time. Would you all agree with that? They're hyper-focused, right? They want to break the world record. They want to be the best of the video game. The question is, why aren't our kids like this in real life, like in school or in home when we need them to do what they need to do? So there's definitely a logic to this video game theory. Think about a video game. Have you ever watched your kid playing them? The incentives are immediate. They're strong and they're predictable. Video games are rich with opportunities for success, from coins to bonus lives to points. The incentives are everywhere and they're available for the taking, right? Players will go out of their way to find more success packaged in these tangible formats. The predictability of the incentives in the game is provided by absolute consistency of how they are doled out in the game. The prerequisites for earning the bells, the whistles, the points, they never change. They're consistent, unlike mom or dad. The game is never in a bad mood. They never forget to give the points or the incentives. The game also never holds prior mistakes against the player. Every moment in the video game is fresh and new, right? To me, this was like an eye-opening, because I hate video games. Personally, I hate them. I think they're awful, but they're huge. Kids love them, and this makes so much sense. The game confronts the child with his success on a moment-to-moment basis. It's all energy in an energetic format. Scores, bells, whistles, coins, lots of energy is transpiring, which informs the child that he or she is doing well and it incentivizes their success. How about this? The rules are clear and predictable. Video games provide choice. At any next instant, the child is fully free to break a rule. The game isn't nagging them and telling them, don't break the rule. Any thoughts on this so far? You think I'm all crazy, don't you? If the kids break a rule in the video game, even a little bit, the game delivers a very clear consequence always. The game doesn't feel sorry for the child. It just delivers the consequence that is immediate. And then from a loss of life to being returned to the beginning of the level or beginning of the game, the consequence is delivered with very little excitement. Within moments, the player is back in the game to try it again. Right? So some of my students who really struggle because they're intense learners in school, they're amazing and will stay and stick to a video game for a long period of time, and they take such pride in getting to that next level. And I have witnessed this from my students when I was teaching at the elementary, the middle school, and the high school. It was amazing to me because I just never understood it as a teacher. I'm like, how can you sit for an hour and a half and work through that video game, but you can't sit here and help me write a paragraph? The consequence is an illusion that creates motivation to participate because being in the game is so exciting. It's so clear and it's so delicious for the child. The child perceives that they have received and served a consequence, but the beauty of it being completed so quickly is that the child gains motivation to try at that success another time. Does that make sense to you? Any thoughts on that?
So one thought I had is that for, in the video game context, it kind of externalizes the consequences a little bit, where, they're unknown, but they're kind of could become just the cost of doing business, that, I'll just keep running Mario off the side and get the penalty. It doesn't always become associated with a decision change so much as that this is the consequence and I'll just pay that.
That's interesting, Ryan. So I don't play video games, so I don't know them as well, but just watching my own kids play, and then also listening to my students over the years talk through it. I was blown away at the thought that, there is no negative energy. There's clear cut rules and there's clear cut consequences. And I think that is super enticing, especially for our intense kids. Think about, when I think about the teenagers that I taught, and just so you know, I had students in my high school classroom that were one step away from either being expelled or quitting, right? So I was dealing with some really intense learners, and their self-image was so low by the time they got to my room in high school that I had to work really hard with them to help them identify what they were good at. Because every human being has skills. Every student that I have had the privilege of teaching, no matter how challenging he or she was, they had greatness in them. And I knew that, right? So helping them to see their greatness, but also having clear consequences and clear rules was also very, very important for them. And the other thing that was super important for me as a teacher was to not energize that negativity. Now, I call that, my behavioral discipline, my behavioral management strategies. Again, so much easier when I'm in a structured classroom as opposed to being a parent. But boy, I'll tell you what, being able to use this approach with my children as they start to drive, as they go off and start to, do things that are big kids, big problems, setting clear consequences, and also knowing when to energize and when not has helped me, I think, to be a better parent for my older adult children. So I found this philosophy, this idea of why the video games are so enticing, really important for me to kind of better understand, oh my God, that's why they were so into playing the games. They got such good feedback. And also, if they made a mistake, here's another thing, brand new day. How many of us hold grudges? I know as a human being, it's hard for me. I'm not usually a huge grudge holder, but I know a lot of people who are. That's part of, again, the human makeup, right? Especially if it's our kids. How many of you take it personal when your kid gets in trouble? I know I did. I still do. I feel like it's a direct reflection on who I am as a human being. Oh my God, because he did this, look at what a bad parent I am. It's those heartstrings, right? So hard to get through. But this approach, and I feel like I'm just going to introduce this approach to you. And I know some of you may have lots of questions because I sure did when I was first introduced to it. But as I start unpacking it, and as I start embracing it and living it, it has changed my relationship with just about every person in my life. I'm going to go to stand 2 now and just talk to you a little bit about that. So we talked through the video game theory. And we move on to stand 2. Absolutely yes. I relentlessly create and energize positivity and success. I energize and nurture firsthand experiences of success. So how do I find that with my intense learner? Well, there are those hard moments, right? And it's really hard because at least for me, my brain was not wired that way, especially as a parent. But there are moments throughout your day, your child's day, when they're doing things that are great, when they are doing things that are right, when they are doing things that are of high character. And it is really up to us to define that for them so that they start to fill their portfolio. And I'm going to use that word, portfolio. We're going to help them to fill their portfolio so that they can have a greater understanding of their strengths, of their challenges, and of their greatness. So it's more than catching them good. Again, I was at fault for this as a teacher and as a mom. Good job. Oh, great job. I'm so proud of you. It's about being very specific. And it's about defining in that stand 2. Absolutely, yes, I'm going to define what I am seeing. And I'm going to let them know that in a very authentic, loving way. It's going to, in essence, help them to understand who they are and the characters that they already have and are already developing that make them a great human being. So let's watch this video and then we'll talk.
What would you like to use, Marlette?
Cat.
A cat? Someone in tribe 2, what would you like to use, Brianna? A dog. Boys and girls, you just worked so well together right there. Thank you for not fighting and feuding over what we were going to choose in that group. In tribe 4, what would you like to choose? Angela.
Frog.
A frog. Boys and girls, put your eyes on me before we do our vote. Let me just take a moment right here to say, during that process, no one fussed, no one was fighting, no one was saying, pick me, I want my answers. You could have been doing all of those things. You could have been fussing and feuding and yelling about what you wanted, but you were respectful to each of your classmates in your tribe. You know what that shows? It shows discipline. Exactly, Brianna. Thank you, Haley. And it shows teamwork. It shows you are disciplined first graders and you have teamwork. Kiss your brains for that.
So that was Yolanda Thorne. She is out of North Carolina. She's actually going to be joining our teachers at the end of this month to do a professional development session on Nurtured Heart. She is one of the staff members actually in her school. 95% of the staff are Nurtured Heart certified and advanced trainers. So pretty amazing. So that was a simple teaching moment, right? She was in her classroom running a very typical lesson, engaging the students and questioning and having them participate. So what did you see? Does anybody want to kind of share what they heard and what they saw Yolanda doing? Did anything stand out?
Well, I just would like to say back to the travel thing, I managed to regroup and thank James for getting the cat bowl filled for the night. I had to think quickly, like before this balloons, what to thank him for. And I would not have done that. I would not have done that if I wasn't anticipating you guys here today and I was rethinking NHA.
Yeah.
but it definitely has helped me throughout. So yeah, that teacher's awesome.
She is awesome. And did you notice that she acknowledged them? Hey, you two could have been feuding, but you didn't. You put your brains together, your thoughts together, and look at what you've created. It was very authentic. Do you all agree? It was very natural. And it was something that maybe if we didn't have that training, at least for me, I maybe would not have acknowledged that moment. And it's looking at those moments throughout the day, those very tiny moments when things are going right. And you as a parent, catching those moments and acknowledging them. But instead of just saying, good job sitting or good job, hey, I noticed that you did this, this, and this. And that tells me that you care about us and you're really helping out. And I appreciate it. Thank you. You know, again, for teenagers my teenagers, it's quick, it's passing, and it has to be super authentic, because if it isn't, they're going to know. But if you start filling those moments and acknowledging those moments, not just with your intense kid, but maybe with all of your children, you're going to start to see a shift in that energy within your home. Hi, Dr. Treece. You want to say
How are
anything?
you? No, I'm listening. I'll pop, I'll pop in.
I know. All right, I'm going to keep going because we have a few more slides, and I know you guys are working and giving up your time. So again, we're talking about creating the time in. You'll see that on this side. Again, working in that stand to, absolutely yes. Like, I'm going to consciously acknowledge one thing that I'm seeing that my child is doing that is good. And I'm going to acknowledge it in a way that it defines to them what they are doing. And it helps them to, in essence, fill that portfolio of understanding who they are and what is good and what is right and what is defining them as a good, great human being. So stand 3 is the third, right? So stand 1 is absolutely no, I refuse to energize negativity. Stand 2, absolutely yes. I'm going to identify even those simple moments throughout the day, and I'm going to acknowledge their greatness, and I'm going to define it. And stand 3 was the example I used. I said very clear rules. It is okay to have rules. It is okay to say no. No hitting, no swearing. Just like I did with my son, here's your rules. And my daughter, here are the rules now that you're able to drive, that Dad and I have. Here are the rules, here's the consequences. So I'm going to set and I'm going to enforce clear limits in a clear consequences in an unenergized way. So again, it would not have been in the best interest of our family or my son or myself if I had, in that moment at 11:46, when he walked in the door, if I started screaming and carrying on, it would not, I don't think good things would have happened. I think he would have kept breaking the rules. Where in a calm situation, I set the rules, I set the consequence. So that in that intense moment, because I was angry, but in that intense moment, I reset myself. I reinforced my stand 3, absolutely clear. Hey, we told you can't come in after 11. And if you do every 15 minutes, you lose the car for a day. Well, you've lost the car for 5 days. Hopefully tomorrow, once you get the car back, things will be better and you won't break it again.
And what you have,
Go ahead, Rosetta.
well, I was going to also say, which makes this very tough, because we all, well, at least I'm going to admit that I was raised by that 1970 parent that, was a whole nother level. Like, okay, so you would got screamed at, the car would have went. And then if you rolled your eyes or slammed the door, I mean, my mother went through the trouble. My sister slammed the door. She took the whole door off the hinges. The door was gone. And we didn't have a door like on our room for like the next 3 years, right? You have to be careful not to re-up the ante, right? They slam the door, they roll their eyes, they go off yelling and cursing. Reset, I need you to reset. Let them go off and throw their tantrum. And then when they stop, I'm so glad you reset. I know you're not happy about the rule, but we agreed to the rule, and then you just move on. Trying to really control that urge to like, well, now you have 2 weeks, now you have 3 weeks, and then you're both on stage and you're both mad, and it really just escalates the situation. And maybe you might have to do it more than once. Maybe you'll have to reset multiple times. Maybe He'll do it again after he gets the car back, but you just simply go back to the rule. We said 5 days, right? And then hopefully you get to that point where if you're not energizing the negativity, we lose the reason to do that. You know, we lose the reason to do that, which Paulette would tell you that ultimately that did happen.
Yeah, he broke it one more time and then that was it. And it stinks. As a 17-year-old boy, you want to be able to drive. And when you lose your car and I took the license, I took the keys, and it was gone for like 2.5 weeks, I think. So that stinks. That's painful. For definitely for a boy, you know, but even like a simple thing, like in kindergarten, one of the biggest things for kids in kindergarten is to be in the line leader. I mean, I can still remember wanting to be the line leader in kindergarten. So a kindergarten teacher could set a rule. Our rules are you keep your hands to yourself when you're in line. Well, if Mary pushes Annie, you don't need to carry on. Oh, what are our rules? No pushing. What's the consequence? Mary, you have to go to the back of the line. Can't be the line leader today. And you move on. Does that make sense to you? Because it didn't make sense to me at first. It took a while to kind of unpack. You know, and I come from a behavioral background, right? So again, that reset was something too. That stand one, absolutely no. That's where I need to reset myself, because I have to catch myself so I don't totally lose my you know what with him or her or them, right? It's up to me. And if we had a whole lot more time, we would unpack that reset, because a lot of families, especially parents, they question, well, what's the difference between a reset and a timeout? And I don't know if some of you are asking that question, but a reset really starts with you as the parent. I'm going to reset. I'm going to take a breath. And I use this language daily. Ask Dr. Treece. She uses it with me. There are times when we're in a meeting and she will say to me, Paulette, you need to reset. And I will do that for her. And there are times when I catch myself and I say out loud, especially because my kids are older and they, you know, it takes a little bit more to shape them. You know what? I need to reset. I'm going to just take a moment. And I'm not ignoring them. I'm just removing my energy from their negativity. I'm going to go back to Sharon. We have a few more slides. So it's absolutely okay to set those rules and to have those consequences. So again, 2 energetic reasons why timeouts fail. Number 1, while we are delivering the timeout, we are typically giving a whole lot of energy. And I think back to when my kids were 2 and 3 and we were coming back from the Hopewell Borough gazebo and my son was throwing a full-blown tantrum because he wanted to, who knows, he wanted the truck or he wanted a candy bar or what. And I can remember pulling him in or pulling my daughter in, whoever it was. And sometimes it was both. And I'm yelling at them to stop yelling and screaming. And then I'm putting them in timeout. And while they're in timeout, I'm talking to them. And I think about how I feel when I'm in that moment as an adult, or I can even think back when I was a child. You think of those moments when you are being intense, when you are upset. The last thing that you want is for someone to yell at you and then try and teach you in that moment. So that was something I learned. And I also think I shared earlier that there were days when I had both of my kids in timeouts like 15 times. Obviously, it wasn't working. It shouldn't have to take that many times. So it also is understanding that stand 2, which has been so hard for me as a teacher and as a mom, because I have to force myself to acknowledge those really tiny moments when my child is doing something that is right. Because again, that doesn't come natural to me. So we go back to thinking of the video game. Now think about, I don't know how many of you played athletics, but the rules of a game, right? You think about all our kids who participate in athletics. The rules are clear. Both the players and the officials know them. It's non-negotiable. There's no warnings. There's immediate, quick consequences for every broken rule. So, right, a toe over the line in basketball is a toe over the line, and that's it. So the other big thing, especially for our intense learners, our children, is that it's okay to not be perfect. And I also feel this way about you and me as parents. Like I think I shared, and I've been sharing the last hour, that this is something that's evolving for me. This is something that I'm working through and I'm learning, and I am not perfect. And just as I'm not perfect and I'm not going to be able to live nurtured heart every second of the day, same for my child, right? They're going to break rules. But if you have these set consequences and you're consistent, you also are going to, in those calm moments, acknowledge, you know what, tomorrow's going to be a better day. Tomorrow's a new fresh day. Or how about 2:30 is, we're starting a whole new hour. And I am confident that you're going to be able to do this, this, and this, because I know you have those skills to do it. So I love this. Rosetta, I know you love it too. Children do not awaken by the fear of punishment, right? They don't become great or amazing human beings because of their punishments. They awaken to their greatness. And I think about all my students, especially my high school students, that, you know, they would come to me ready to quit. They would come to me, you know, with stories, horrible stories of what their family said to them, what previous teachers said to them. Their portfolio was filled with nothing but negativity. So in essence, that's how they defined who they are. Right? So again, it was up to me as a teacher to help them. And I'm talking little moments. Hey, I noticed that you just read that chapter on your own while I was helping so-and-so. And that's pretty awesome that you took that initiative. And it's telling me that you've got great skills, independent skills, you know, and helping them to kind of redefine who they are and giving them hope and giving them that motivation, that intrinsic motivation. Hey, I am capable of doing great things. And I do have these skill sets, and I'm not perfect. That's okay, because we're humans. And then guiding them to understanding that, again, in essence, it helped those kids. Those kids graduated. Both the boys and girls, that I had 100% graduation rate. I know Dr. Treece did as well with hers, because she had the same kind of kids, learners in Trenton, right? Because again, we were able to help them see those moments of greatness, to define it for them and to give them hope in themselves. A lot easier for me to do as a teacher than a mom.
It is.
But I'm working on that as a mom. I'm working every day. I think that's our last one. Let me see here.
I think so. I think maybe.
Yeah, I think that was it. Do you have any questions for us? Any thoughts? This is, again, just a very small introduction. Cynthia.
I'll speak just because I'm not a school teacher, but I teach dance. So I work with a lot of children, and I've been doing it for almost 30 years. So I can relate to a lot of things that you're saying, especially as a teacher. And I noticed the one thing that you had said about, you know, removing yourself and kind of the timeout versus giving yourself that time. One thing that I did with the children, instead of like saying, okay, well, you're not behaving, you need to step out of the classroom, I then turned off the lights and said, I'm walking away. And when I come back, I'm going to come back into a different classroom. And actually removing myself from the situation and letting myself like calm down, knowing that they were not behaving, really changed their attitude. So it's quite interesting how that kind of works. And like you were saying, it's very different when you're dealing with students rather than your own children, because things that work on students don't work on my child the same way. So it's quite interesting to hear the different verses.
Yeah, and Cynthia, that was a beautiful explanation of how you reset yourself and your class. I mean, that was a very natural way, and you're resetting them. You're not energizing that negativity, and you're guiding and redirecting that. Okay. So this weekend, my daughter plays field hockey very competitively, and she did not start the game on Saturday, which is like not normal for her. So I knew that was going to be something that bothered her, right? So she gets in the car, we're driving home, she's silent, and I'm like, hey, listen, I noticed that you didn't start the game, but then I noticed that they put you in and you did an amazing job setting up that goal. And I just want you to know that that just showed me that you're patient, you're a team player, because it's not all about you. And I think that's going to make you an even better player when you hit college in September. That was total nurtured heart. I would not have normally done that. And you know, I thought she was going to be miserable. She wasn't. So I just said that, and then we just kept driving, and she was fine the rest of the night. So again, it was taking, I don't think I would have normally noticed that or been able to recognize that stand 3, recognize it in a positive way to help her process that. So it's just, again, for me, I'm constantly trying to find that stand 2, those moments, and to acknowledge them in a very authentic way, right? Because children know when you're not being authentic. Human beings know when you're not being authentic. And I'll close with this. We were trained, Rosetta and I went through this amazing training in January. We went into lockdown, 4 weeks later. And I remember putting on my gloves and my masks, my 2 masks, those first week or 2 when we were in lockdown, to walk into ShopRite to do my grocery shopping. And I was scared. And as I was walking in, I was thinking, I'm scared and I'm going to go in and out. And that cashier and that bagger are there for 6 hours. So you know what? Because of this training and because I'm evolving, every time I walked into that grocery store, I acknowledged them. Hey, I noticed that you're here working and we're in the middle of this crisis and nightmare. And I just want you to know how much I appreciate how brave you are. And I want you to know how much I appreciate you helping us through this. And I can't tell you, I'm going at 6:30 in the morning because I was freaked out too, right? We all were. And I couldn't get the groceries delivered because I'm a little slow with that. So it's too slow. But it allowed me to practice it. And I feel like in my heart, and it made a difference in their lives through that because they were super brave. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking outside of school. I'm looking outside of my office, my meetings. I'm using it, but I'm using it throughout my life. Mm-hmm.
And again, make things easier. It does, because I've been in angry meetings with parents who are very, very upset, and they will say either saying something disrespectful or they're being really, really, intense with me. And I stop and I take a breath, and I say, I hear that you have a lot of passion about your child. You're serious about your child's education, and I know you're being intense because you care. And that just really they feel heard, and then we're all able to reset and then get to working together to get to a solution. But trying to look for, even in this moment where you're being intense, it's not really about me. You're being intense because of this is happening, and I need to acknowledge that, and then we can get back to center. Even when I'm dealing with colleagues, and resetting myself, saying, you know what, right now I'm feeling frustrated. I can feel my chest getting tight. I'm getting annoyed, and I need to reset. And then stepping out of the situation and then coming back, and people, acknowledging your feelings in that moment also will allow everyone else to take a breath and reset. So it really starts with you, because a lot of times we make it about us and it really isn't. When our kids are being disrespectful, we feel, or they're not doing what they're supposed to do, we feel like parents, that reflects on us. We're like, how dare you, little creature that has everything, and you're doing this, and it becomes really about us and not really about them. And it's hard to reset that as a parent.
So the other thing too is that I don't think we as parents, again, I think I mentioned, I take it very personal when my kid makes a mistake. And I think that's pretty common, right? Because of those heartstrings. There are 9 of you on this call today in the middle of the day. To me, again, I need you to nurture your hearts as parents, that you're taking time out of your day, your work day, to learn, to grow, to reflect, so that you can be the best parent you possibly can. Again, that shows me that you have the greatness of love, and you're driven to be as best as you can, so that you can give your children those goals, those strengths, and that amazing portfolio to go off and do amazing work in this world. So I'm going to ask you, if you get nothing else out of this last hour, it's that you take a moment today, and I'd encourage you to take a moment each day to to identify your greatness. Think of one thing that you did that was extraordinary, because you're doing extraordinary things all day long with your children. And it's those simple things, right, that I think we don't realize or we take for granted, but you are. And I think you need to acknowledge that, because when you acknowledge your greatness as a parent, you're in turn going to be able to acknowledge and to energize your child in a way that you never have before. So really
As a
starts with
single
you.
parent, we have to acknowledge that as single parents.
Yeah.
Like I can tap out when I'm about ready to choke my kids. Somebody, so you need to acknowledge your own greatness too and see what you're doing well. Because just like we can pick out everything our kids are doing wrong, we're pretty good about doing that to ourselves too. Or what we think we're doing wrong. The fact that you're here is just amazing.
So do we have books? Do we have extra books, Rosetta?
I think we may. I'll check and see.
So if you would like a book, let us know. Let Lori know, and we'll get you a book. And we should have an idea. I'd like to run a 3-week session before the end of the year. If we do a 3-hour session, we'll do 3 1-hours. We'll just really unpack this a little more, dig a little deeper, and have just some more videos, some more examples, and just talking through this for you. Because again, for each of us, it's very different. Our triggers are different. The way we reset is different, identifying our greatness, and then also energizing. That is something, again, that I've been really working through. There's different ways to energize through different types of recognitions. And so the 3-hour, the 6-hour does allow us to unpack that a little more deeply. I just really appreciate and thank you for your attention and your interactive faces and just being here and being very present. It truly is a gift to us today. So thank you.
So Paulette and Dr. Treece, thank you. And will these sessions be on Zoom? Because as you know, as single parents, childcare can get in the way.
Yes.
Absolutely. And we try to remember to tape them if somebody's absent and share that with you as well.
And thank you for offering. Is this the book? Is this what everybody should be on the lookout for?
Yes, I'm going to try to, yes, I should be able to gather enough copies.
Well, again, I cannot recommend this course enough. And so please try it if you can swing the time. And now that it's on Zoom, hopefully you can. I'm not kidding. It totally transformed the relationship I have with my child and now my dog. But that's a different story.
It works on significant others too. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so
Mom
much,
and Dad,
Dr. Treece.
just say apologies to my dad real fast too, because they did use some nurtured heart tactics back in the 70s day. So anyhow,
Not
I
my
had
mom.
to recover that one from an earlier comment. Just in
My
case.
mom ran boot camp in my house. She didn't, not very nurtured. I still love her, but it was.
Great.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Treece and Paulette, so much for your insight, really your personal experiences and stories. I think that's really how we learn the most from, that you can relate to it, because I think it is. The self-awareness is huge to pause. Even that teacher, when she said, let's just pause for a second and recognize, life is so fast. And as a single parent, I mean, I can't even imagine the running around and the spinning and the checklist in the head constantly, that the pause is so important. So just thank you for the awareness today and reminding us to pause. I'm going to stop the recording now, but thank you all so much.